Yeah, man, this was super fun. Half-Life is fun. I like it. It's a good game. Do you plan on going to the tank museum? Yeah, definitely. You can definitely expect a lot of me going to different tank museums to show up on the channel, like more so than it already has. And I will also 100% give you guys in the Discord and stuff heads up. So if you guys are going to be at that tank museum around the same time, you kind of know to look for me. Golden cookie! Yo, it's game time. It's game time. We just grabbed a golden cookie, boys. My summer car stream is going to be great. Yeah, dude, it's going to be hilarious. Yeah, I agree. 100%. I'm excited for that. I don't know if I've said this, but I think the reason you're doing so well on YouTube is because you're so positive about all tanks, and even bad ones, and it really is refreshing. Thanks. I try to, like, I just love tanks. Like, that's really where, like, it's really all it is. Like, it's just, I don't hate any one particular tank. I can call out, like, obviously the Bob Simple, but I hate that tank because it's just a meme tank that, and it's a dead meme that gets beat. It's a dead horse. Sorry, everyone beats the dead horse. It's just over and over again. Like KV2, Bob Simple, like all these tanks are just, everyone memes them so much to death. But, like, you know, I don't hate the tank. I guess there are some certain tank YouTubers that really do, like, they just trash on stuff. They just trash on tanks, like certain tanks. And yeah, that makes me sad. That makes me really sad. Bad tanks are where the fun is at? I mean, yes, but again, I don't know, I would hesitate to call tanks bad. Like, I feel like a military is usually pretty good at sussing out, like, truly bad tanks. Like, yes, you can have a tank that is adopted and used, and maybe, you know, it's a tank that was developed for the wrong war. Or, you know, they bit off more than they could chew, and they couldn't produce it in the numbers that they wanted or at the quality they wanted. But I think you find very, very few instances throughout history where a big army puts into the main frontline service of a war a truly bad tank. Like, a tank that is just irredeemable, like complete garbage. I really don't think you find much of that in history, like, at all. I'm interested in Italian tanks, because, you know, they're notoriously bad, but I would want to learn more about Italian tanks to know for sure. Are they genuinely bad, or did they actually work pretty well for Italy? Most of the bad tanks really are only bad in hindsight. It's usually where most of the cool ideas were being tried. Well, yeah, that's why, like, modern tanks aren't that interesting to me. I mean, they are interesting because they're doing a lot of wacky, fancy technology, and they're experimenting with a lot of cool stuff. But, like, dude, like, the 1920s and 30s was just insane. And I think it's why I've said before that, like, 1935 to 1941 is my personal favorite era of the tank. You're not quite in the 1920s anymore, so, like, tanks aren't, like, built out of plywood. But you're not in the 1940s, and, like, we still don't really know what a tank actually is. And so you have all these very interesting designs, and all of them are, like, 2-person, 3-person tanks. And I like smaller, quicker, faster, nippier, like, I kind of like tanks like that. I like lighter, smaller tanks. I don't like big, heavy tanks. I've said before, like, I think German super heavies and just super heavy tanks in general are, like, the stupidest thing. I don't like super heavies because it's the exact same story every single time. They took a tank, they put a shit ton of armor on it. It was not tactically flexible in any way. It was really good at tanking shots, but that was all it was good at. And then they quickly found out, oh wait, we actually don't have a real battlefield use for that. And so they abandoned it. And every single country came to the exact same conclusion. It's like the battlefield, or the battle rifle. It's like, you know, the United States going with the M14 and saying, yeah, we still want 30-06, but we're going to turn it over into 7.62 NATO, and we're going to keep the idea of, like, the rifleman. He's going to have this full caliber. Everyone else has to join us, so all of NATO has to have the FAL, the G3, the M14, all these large caliber rifles, and it's going to be awesome. This is the way that things are going. This is going to be great. And then they were like, wait a minute, these weapons are not tactically flexible. They're good at a thing, but that's all they're good at. And then it's like, why did we bother? And then at the end of the day, everyone just goes back to using intermediate cartridges because that is the superior option, depending on what you're trying to do with it. Obviously, yes, full power cartridges have their place, but sorry for the long rant, but yeah. I love the 50s when it comes to tanks and planes. I rant about how much I don't like early Cold War super heavies, but at the same time, I don't know much about them. I mean, the Soviet Union during the Cold War, literally, I forget which leader it was, or president, I believe the Soviet Union had presidents, put in a law, or like put in a rule or a law in the Soviet Union that said we cannot build tanks any heavier than, like, I think it was like 50 tons, right? 50 or 60? Because like, he was like, this super heavy thing is dumb, like, it's not working, like, this is bad, like, these things are stupid. Super heavies usually only get built because of paranoia that the opposing nation have a bigger tank. Yeah, but there's only so big you can get, and I think that's what we learned in the Cold War, because you reach a certain point where you cannot slap more armor on that tank. It just becomes too heavy. And I think most people realize that. We're like, as long as we have a tank that's capable of killing most heavy tanks, then even if they come out with something heavier, they're not going to be able to build it in large numbers, and it's just not going to be an effective fighting vehicle. So, like, we're good. At least that's what I would think. I love the Editor 220 end of stream rants. Thank you very much. Yeah, 45-ish tons because of bridging requirements. Okay, it was bridging requirements. And even today, like, I was doing research for a video that I didn't end up putting out because I wasn't happy with it. But I was doing research into like the future of tanks. And like a big thing that every nation is looking at right now is weight. Because you have like America looking at the Abrams and realizing, well, like, hey, you know, we built this tank at, for sake of argument, you know, 40 tons, 50 tons, whatever. But the Abrams has a very long lifespan, but we've only been able to give it such a long lifespan by tacking shit onto it. Yes, that's worked, that's been nice, but it adds weight, it adds a lot of weight. And now, like, the new like SEP V4 compared to like the original M1, I think it's like over 10 tons heavier, I'm pretty sure. Like, it went from like 45 or 50 to like almost 60, almost 70, I think. I forget how heavy the most modern Abrams is, but like it's a lot heavier than it used to be. So now, if we build a new tank that has all the bells and whistles of the SEP V4, it's probably going to be about 60 tons. So then, if that tank also has like a 30-year lifespan, then that tank's going to go from 60-something tons to like 80-something tons, and that's not sustainable. So the U.S. were like, hold up, like whatever tank we adopt next has to have all this stuff integrated already. It has to be low weight, and like we need the next tank to already be like super low weight, because if it has a long lifespan, we're going to tack all this shit onto it. It's like, the idea is like, what if we built a tank for like 30 tons or, you know, 40 tons, so that in 30 years, when it has all this shit tacked onto it, at the end of it all, it only weighs 50-ish tons or whatever, right? The Germans have said, fuck it, went up and they were like, that's not possible. Like, it's not going to work. What they're looking at like a T-14 situation. They're going to build one chassis that can be swapped around to be like a main battle tank, an IFV, probably artillery, I would imagine. And they want to have like a fleet of vehicles. So instead of having one tank, like instead of having a main battle tank, really, instead of having one tank like an Abrams or a Leopard, that, you know, you tack all this stuff onto it and it can do a lot of different things, but you're adding a shit ton of weight, and 30 years down the line, it's going to be like 20 tons heavier. Instead, what if we took those duties and split them amongst a fleet of vehicles, and those vehicles like basically stay the same weight always, because you don't need to tack all this crap onto them, because you can always just swap out parts, and like it's all interchangeable. It's all the same family of vehicles. That is genuinely in a conference about like the future of tanks. The Bundeswehr came up and they said, this is what we want. Like, this is the direction we're heading. So like Leopard 2A7, Leopard 2A8. I think the Leopard 2A8 exists. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's not the future. KF-51 Panther, that's not the future. The Germans don't want it. They want this they want to do a new thing with a fleet of vehicles. They're going the T-14 route, which is so interesting because people criticize the T-14 for that. Laserpig said in his video, he was like, why the fuck would you build your infantry fighting vehicles on the same chassis that your main battle tank is built on? Like, if you have a main battle tank with all this armor and it weighs 50-something tons, why would you make it modular so you can just take off the turret and put an infantry support in, you know, like an autocannon, like a Bradley turret on it? I'm just using examples. And then now it's an infantry fighting vehicle, but it still weighs like 60-something tons. Like, that's a really dumb idea. In Red Effect's response video, he claimed, well, you can still build the same chassis, but you can make it less weight because you can reduce the armor. But I don't believe there are many instances in history where you took a chassis of a vehicle and rebuilt it, but with less armor, so that it could suit that chassis could suit another role. Usually, if a chassis is repurposed, they just, like, it's got the same armor, a lot of the same bells and whistles, like, they really just swap it, like the turret or something, or the engine, or like whatever it is they're swapping for whatever purpose they're doing. But yeah, the Bundeswehr spoke, and that's what they want. T-14 was ahead of its time, I would say. T-14 was ahead of its time in a lot of ways. Like, you can talk shit about it all you want, but like, again, crewless turret, everyone down in the hall, you know, I think that's the future of tanks. Abrams X wants to do that. I think conceptually the T-14 is actually a really good tank. Distributing chassis, one chassis for a bunch of things. I think that's the future. And the West seems to agree. Like Germany seems to agree. At least that's what they want. So it's interesting. The T-15 is actually an interesting idea because it's an IFV that could theoretically tank a tank round. Like, yeah, that too, right? There is the idea of like, yeah, like, why don't we build our IFVs to MBT armor standards? Because, I mean, sure, like, your IFVs are going to get shot at by MBTs, you know? So, you know, who knows? And, I mean, that's the M10 Booker argument, isn't it? Because the M10 Booker is still super heavy, even though it's supposed to be like a lighter Abrams, or like, you know, a light tank version of an Abrams. It's not a light tank, actually. It's an infantry support vehicle. Don't call it a tank, because then the crews will start using it like a tank. Which is true. And America's like things are moving, guys. America is replacing the Bradley. Did anybody know that? I didn't know that until like a week ago. The Bradley's on its way out. Like, we're done. USA is going to find something new. Like, it's already in testing. Like, General Dynamics and Rheinmetall have both already submitted functioning vehicles, and they are being tested as we speak to replace the Bradley. 2030 is going to be a huge year. 2030, like, if you've been looking at what the US military has been doing, like, 2030 is like the year. Like, that's going to be like, the US military will be totally rebuilt from the ground up. They've got the M10 Booker. They're going to replace the Bradley. They've got the M7 to replace the M4. The mission of the Marine Corps has been totally redesignated to be a Pacific Theater-focused force, and now they don't have tanks anymore, right? They don't have the Abrams anymore. There's a lot of changes in the U.S. military, and if you look at all these different things, like, it seems like the deadline is 2030. That's also when the Abrams is set to retire, or that's when the Abrams is like its life expectancy is set to be. Like, the U.S. military has said several times in a lot of documents, we expect the Abrams to last us until 2030. And once 2030 comes around, they're going to take a look. Do we try something else, or do we keep this up? And that's going to be an interesting conversation, I think. M10 Booker is proof that something like an M60 or T62 is actually still useful in a modern setting. Yeah, I mean, it's the idea of, like, yeah, like, as long as you have a tank is a tank. I mean, sure, certain tanks can be better at something than others, but a tank is a tank. And it's more about how you use it than what it actually is. Military History Visualized did an interview with a guy in Ukraine. They ended up talking about, like, what makes an old tank still viable today, and he kept focusing on, like, thermals, thermal optics, and a good fire control system. Okay, would you take a T-55 with thermal optics and a good fire control system over a T-72 with no thermal optics and, like, a very manual, fiddly fire control system? And he was like, the T-55 every day of the week. Thermal optic, like, having thermals on your tank is just so advantageous that, yes, like, if you can put thermals and a good fire control system on an old tank, it can still be useful today. And I mean, that makes sense, right? Whoever shoots first. We've known this since World War II. I don't know why people still argue this, but whoever shoots first in a tank engagement usually wins. Doesn't matter if it's a Sherman 75 against a Panther. Doesn't matter if it's a Stuart against a King Tiger, or what was it, Greyhound or whatever it was against a King Tiger, right? I still don't know if that story's true, but it would be very funny if it was. If you can see the enemy first, you win. And that goes across, that's not just tanks, that goes across, like, what do you think the F-35 is all about? What do you think whatever is going to replace the F-35 is all about? Being able to get a radar lock on a target from past the horizon? Again, if I see you first, I win. Like, that is Warfare 101, or, you know, that's Combat 101, Ranged Combat 101. If I can see you and you can't see me, I win. Or, even better, if we can both see each other, but I can touch you with better range, like my gun has a longer range, and your gun does not have a long enough range to touch me, then I win. As simple as it's literally as shrimple as that. Was the MPF not the Bradley replacement? No. The MPF was they took a look at the Abrams, and again, they were like, hey, the Abrams is like 60-something tons, this thing's fucking heavy, and this thing's slow, relatively speaking. There's a lot of places that an Abrams can't go. Logistically speaking, there's also, again, a lot of places that an Abrams can't go, or a lot of extra attention that needs to be given to an Abrams. I'm going to use all the wrong terminology on, like, the divisional structural level because I don't understand any of it, but I'm trying. What the MPF was supposed to be is, what if we took an Abrams, or a vehicle like an Abrams, that had the similar capabilities to an Abrams, but we made it small, and we made it light, and we made it able to go places that the Abrams can't. More specifically, what if we gave the standard light infantry brigade, or light infantry division, Abrams-like capabilities in the infantry support role? So that's what the MPF is. The M10 Booker is an assault gun, yeah. It's functionally speaking, it's more of a Stuggeschütz. It's more comparable to, like, a Stug from World War II. You get very muddled in it, because it's like, well, if it's an infantry support vehicle, then why didn't they give it, like, a howitzer? It's like, well, in case it fights tanks. It's like, oh, so it's supposed to fight tanks? Well, yes, but it's not supposed to. Like, it's supposed to, but it's not supposed to. But in case it needs to, it can. But it's not supposed to. That's why people don't want to call it a light tank, because if you call it a light tank, if you call it a tank, then you imply that it's basically a light Abrams, which it is, but it's not a light Abrams in that they don't want it to be used for the same duties as an Abrams. There's a T-90 over there. Let's go send in the M10s. Let's go wait for the heavy brigade to catch up, and let's get their Abrams, and let's use the Abrams. It's more so of we're assaulting a town, we are softening up some positions, we're supporting infantry, and then, oh shit, a T-72 shows up. At least the Booker can deal with it. But we would prefer if an Abrams did. Why have you been streaming for 6 hours? Because I'm cooler than you. Because I can afford to. Because I'm literally badass.
Because I'm a stud. I'm ballsy. I don't take no shit from anyone.
Well, yeah. So the Army is hellbent on calling the M10 an MPF. It is mobile protected firepower. That's literally all it is. It is a big gun on a mobile chassis, and it has armor. They really shy away from calling it a light tank. Well, because first of all, it's not that light. That's a big criticism people have of the MPF right now, and why a lot of people think that, like, what was the point? Because the MPF is like 40-something tons still, which kind of negates a lot of the logistical advantages that it was supposed to offer. Because you still need, I think it's like you still need like heavy transport and bridging equipment to get it anywhere. So like you might as well just have an Abrams. I don't know how true that is, but I've seen that around. Remember correctly, they dropped a bunch of light tank / IFV projects specifically because the PT-76 was amphibious. We dropped a lot of light tank projects in the Cold War, I know, because we wanted stuff to be like air deployable and stuff too. America just can't make light stuff. Everything we make is just heavy. Like, we just make heavy shit. It's because we're so buffed. It's because we're so strong. It's because we're all built for tough. Jen Abrams rising from his grave when the U.S. develops a so-called light tank that cannot be paradropped. Well, so like, why does light tank have to be paradropped? Is that the new definition of light tank, that it has to be paradropped? Yes, the MPF program originally had a air deployable requirement, but from what I read, as they kept going, they dropped it. Not only because they started realizing like, we don't really need it, but from what I read too, it was just as much a problem with the technology of being able to paradrop tanks like that. It was not being developed anymore, like the parachutes and the release mechanisms or whatever it is that goes into that stuff. Like, they said that like that technology, that area of R&D was not receiving funding and not getting research and wasn't going anywhere. So even if we made a light tank MPF that was, air deployable, air droppable out of a plane in midair, we wouldn't have had the parachute drop technology to accompany it. At least not any that is like modern and good and we trust, because those programs had lost funding and they just weren't happening. Make the planes bigger, dumbass, then you can airdrop everything. Dude, you're so right about that. Honestly, David, they need to hire you over at the Pentagon. You're clearly just goated. Because there's two different versions of that, right? There's air deployable, as in like, I think what everyone thinks of, which is we fly a plane over the front line, occupied territory, I don't know. We fly a plane and then the cargo bay opens and we drop the tanks out the back of the plane in midair, and they parachute down, and it's super badass and cool. Which, unpopular opinion, but I just don't think that works, man. Like, let's think about this strategically and tactically. Like, what does that accomplish? What can you do with that? Surprise, there's a platoon of Abrams behind the front lines. Whoa! Okay, well, now you've just paradropped an entire platoon of Abrams behind enemy territory, and they're all going to get wrecked, because tanks famously need infantry support and artillery support and air support to function. So, great, you've just isolated an entire platoon of Abrams. That's probably going to get destroyed. Not Abrams, MPF, light tank, whatever it is. Okay, what if we paradrop the tanks over the front lines? Okay, then why didn't you just drive them there? If that was your plan, then what? Then why? Whereas, if you make a tank that is air deployable in the sense that it can be carried in decently large numbers by a cargo plane that is readily available, and we have a lot of them, so we can, en masse, load a bunch of these tanks into these planes, fly a large number of them to anywhere on Earth, and then land the planes at an airfield, whatever it is, and then deploy the tanks. That is a great capability, especially for the United States, fighting in a across-the-globe theater. The ability to say, hey, we got a bunch of MPFs that just left the factory in fucking Michigan or whatever, in Detroit. Get them on a plane and fly them to China or whatever, like within 24 hours, within 48 hours. If you can do that, that's great. That's a very, very good thing to be able to do. The Abrams can be air deployed in that sense. Like, you can load an Abrams onto a plane, but as far as I know, you can only put one per plane. Whereas the MPF, you can put two. Which, by the way, doesn't sound like a lot. Like, 1 to 2, big whoop. But the mathematicians of you out there will say that you are quite literally doubling the amount of tanks you can now transport to these zones. Which is, statistically, you go to your boss and you say, hey bro, I just doubled the amount of tanks we can deploy in mass across the globe. Dude, that's worth a promotion. That's great. Good job. That's awesome. Drop them to your base, but it's easier than landing? I don't think it is, dude. I think a lot more can go wrong paradropping a tank. What if it lands in a tree, dude? And the answer is, well, then just don't drop it over any trees. It's like, yeah, sure, but like, real life is not perfect. Like, you can say, like, listen, boss, all we have to do is just paradrop them in big, wide open fields. Okay, well, we're fighting in the Pacific, and like, these islands are small, and the jungles are thick. I'm sorry, but you just gotta land these at an airfield, because that's the only place, like that's all you got. Maybe if you have a tank that rely on ERA and active protection, then maybe you can have a light tank that could be light. I think that is the only answer. Yes, I think active protection systems is the true answer to that. And I think that's the direction tanks are going. If you want a tank to be lighter, you have to, and this was the exact same crux you face in World War II, after World War II. Because what contributes the most to a tank's weight? Armor. Always has been. That has always been the case. The solution after World War II was composite armor. Yeah, I think we are at another impasse in tank technology. Tanks are still too heavy, so like we need to drop even more weight, because now we're tacking on it. Now tanks are no longer heavy in armor, although I mean, yes, they are. But now they're also heavy because we're tacking all these different capabilities onto them. The next step, like the same way we went from normal armor to composite armor in the 60s, I think it was, we're going to have to find that next jump in protection. And it's going to be hard. The lethality of tank cannons these days, and the lethality of tank ammunition, and anti-tank ammunition in general, right? The lethality of that stuff is insane. I do personally believe, like, I do think in the race between protection and firepower, I do believe firepower has the upper hand, and honestly has for a very long time. Any tank can kill any tank. Like, once Sabo was invented, that was it. The amount of penetration that we get out of our rounds these days is insane. Utterly ridiculous. And yeah, something like APS or ERA really is the only solution. I mean, composite armor does work. You have to hit it from the front. Like, if you get hit anywhere but directly in your front plate, like, you're done, man. At the very least, you get penned. Maybe you're not instantly destroyed. I personally believe that. The only practical air droppable AFV is something like a German Weasel. But again, I don't know what, like why? Like, why would you want to drop a Weasel out of a plane? What's the situation you see that? Actually, okay, air droppable Weasel. Let's explore that concept. That's basically an M22 or a Tetrarch. A tank that accompanies the 101st Airborne or whatever it is, that when we drop them behind enemy lines to destroy bridges and do all their sabotage work before the main attack comes, which is what paratroopers are best at. That's what paratroopers are for. And if you can give those guys some kind of vehicular support, if you can do it, then sure, why not? But I also think that adds a lot of complication to it. And logistics, instantly, right? I think of what happens if the Weasel breaks down behind enemy lines. Now you're adding a lot of stuff for a simple capability. Invest in stealth. It's a tank, dude. Tanks are not meant to be stealthy. The day tanks become stealthy, I will eat my shoe. Live on stream. I will eat a shoe live on stream. The problem with tank armor in general is that they can never protect every aspect. So as soon as you introduce top attack and precision munition, everything goes out the window. There are counters to those things. I have seen photos of cope cages working. Shocking. I know, right? The thing I believe with post-World War II paradropping tanks is that they're too large for the most part. Stuff like the Weasel or BMD series work in terms of paradropping them. The US couldn't deal with that. Because I think the US has the same problem with paradropping a Weasel that I do. It's like, why bother? If you're paradropping a Weasel, ultimately you are still making your paratroopers less maneuverable. You are ultimately still adding a burden to that force. Like, again, you could do it, but like, what's the practical benefit? Like, is it better than what you're currently doing now? But then again, I mean, maybe modern combat is different. And I think that's why the US would say that, right? That's where I was going with this. Is the US would look at that and say, like, yeah, a paradrop Weasel is too little. It's not enough. If you're going to sack your paratroopers with the burden of an armored vehicle, you might as well give it the big kahunas. You know, you might as well go all in. And again, but this is all in the context of accompanying paratroopers, which is, again, even in my opinion, I just don't think it's a good idea. Like, I just blatantly don't think it's a good idea. And I think that's why ultimately paradrop light tanks in the US have also not gone anywhere. I'm interested to see if we find a situation to test that concept, though. I don't know. Maybe there's a war game out there somewhere where they were able to paradrop tanks behind enemy lines, and they're like, hey, it worked. And I will eat my boot. I'll eat my other shoe. I'll eat one shoe if tanks become stealthy, and I'll eat the other shoe if paradropping tanks behind enemy lines works. You can clip that and ship that, man. T95 was the best stealth tank. It was 27-year hide and seek champion. Okay, but what if you don't drop a Weasel with every squad? You only put it where it's needed. What does that mean? It still has to be accompanied by infantry, or at least it should. It should, motherfucker. If you don't accompany your tanks with infantry, then you're just doing it wrong. But if you look at the battlefield and you go, all right, we're gonna put paratrooper infantry here, paratrooper infantry there, paratrooper infantry here, and let's put a paradrop Weasel right there. It's like, okay, what is the tactical situation that you believe necessitates paradropping a Weasel specifically right there without accompanying infantry? What situation do you imagine would require such a call to be made? This is why we need the Aerogavin. It has everything. Walter J. Christie was onto this before any of us were. Although, actually, that's even funnier because Walter J. Christie didn't want to do a flying tank because of, like, paratropping behind enemy lines. Walter J. Christie wanted to do flying tanks For the same reason he did trackless tanks, was I just want them to be able to get to the battlefield faster, which is exactly what air deployable tanks really are. I think we need to put this concept to bed. Unless we develop some crazy technology that makes it possible and we find some battlefield niche where it is actually good, I think we need to put to bed the idea that an air deployable tank means you are flying over a zone and dropping tanks out the back of a plane in midair. I think when we say air deployable, we should be thinking you can put it on a plane and you can fly it in large numbers to a total other location on Earth and then deploy it. Like, we need to be thinking, that's what it is. The first option is thinking tactically. The second option is thinking strategically. So I think we need to stop thinking about air deployable tanks tactically and think about them strategically, which is how they are in real life. That's so far, that's the only successful use of an air deployable tank, is strategically. And I think that makes sense. And again, that makes sense why the US would be so interested in it. Because of all nations in the world, the US would be the most interested in flying a tank anywhere in the goddamn world and having it land and letting it do work. When we start dreaming up these super complicated ideas for, like, what if we made a tank do this thing? Like, what if we had a tank that we could drop out of a plane? It's like, okay, like, that's a great, like, that sounds great. But, like, let's think about it. Why wouldn't you just drop a bomb on it? Whatever it is you're trying to destroy. Or, like, we're trying to support paratrooper infantry. It's like, okay, like, give them a radio and they can call in for artillery support from the front line. Because, like, hopefully they're not that far back. Or we got planes that can spot stuff for them and give them air support, hopefully. Hopefully we have air superiority. I mean, if you are paradropping infantry behind enemy lines, you better have air superiority. You better, or else that's desperation. And at that point, yeah, the winner of a war is he who makes the least mistakes. I think we should stop. This was a great rant. I hope you guys enjoyed it too, but we really should stop. I mean, I have been live for literally 6.5 hours. I'm gonna end up changing the title of this episode to, like, Half-Life Episode 2 plus hour-long tank rant. Thank you guys for watching the stream. Go ahead and leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. If you're watching the VOD, donate to the Patreon, subscribe to the main channel, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, leave a like, do all that fun YouTube stuff. Tank rant stream went. I did the first drunk stream we did. I spent the first, like, hour or two ranting about tanks. I love the idea of tank rant streams. I actually do. I really do. Like, I think we should do entire streams. Like what we just did now for, like, the last hour and a half. I do think it would be really fun to just do an entire stream of that. Appreciate you being here for the stream. Bye. 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 Don't clip that. Please don't clip that. Please don't screenshot that.